A battle for survival under the Singapore lights did a 5-second punishment that erased a masterpiece. And a decision by the FIA that could change Hamilton's relationship with Ferrari forever. When the FIA summoned Lewis Hamilton after the race, few in the paddock expected what followed. The meeting was short, clinical, and final. The stewards presented the data, multiple instances of the car crossing white lines, each documented, each timed, each tagged by sensors that know no emotion. Hamilton listened in silence. There was no argument, no defense. He knew what the evidence showed, but he also knew that the evidence told only half the story. The other half, the human half, would never appear in an FIA report. It was the story of a man saving a car that should have stopped and being punished for refusing to surrender. The ruling came down with mechanical precision. 5 seconds, the standard penalty for repeated violations. To the FIA, it was a simple procedural matter. To Hamilton, it felt like a dismissal of everything he had endured. For 61 laps, he had balance between control and catastrophe, holding together a car that wanted to die under him. Now that effort was reduced to a number on a sheet of paper. His name moved one place down in the final results, and that was that. But everyone who had watched the race knew what had really happened. The penalty may have changed the classification, but it could not erase what they had witnessed: the craft, the will, the composure. Inside the Ferrari garage, the atmosphere turned heavy. Mechanics who had cheered Hamilton across the line now stood silent, watching the revised standings appear on the screens. Engineers stared at telemetry data they already knew by heart. They had seen the brake temperature spike, had watched the pressure fade, had felt the tension in every radio message. For them, the penalty was not justice. It was a statement, a reminder that in Formula One, context does not protect you from consequence. Fred Vasseur met Hamilton's gaze as he returned from the steward's office. There were no words, only a look that said everything. They had fought the system and lost. As the night went on, the debate grew. Journalists surrounded the Ferrari paddock, microphones raised, searching for reaction. Hamilton remained calm, his voice low, his answers measured. "It is what it is," he said. "I did my best with what I had." But beneath that calm surface was something sharper, not anger but resolve. It was the quiet awareness that this was not just about Singapore. It was about the pattern repeating again and again. Technical errors, strategic hesitations, regulatory decisions, all conspiring to turn effort into frustration. And for Hamilton, a man who built his career on mastering control, this loss of control cut deeper than any penalty could. Across the paddock, other drivers spoke quietly about what had happened. Some sympathized. Others simply shrugged, knowing how the sport works. But one voice stood out: Fernando Alonso, the man who had inherited Hamilton's lost position. In a post-race interview, he was asked whether he thought the penalty had been fair. He paused for a moment, then said he drove a car that should not have finished. That says it all. It was a subtle admission from a rival, but it captured the truth. The issue was no longer about the white lines. It was about how Formula One treats courage when it does not fit within the data. By Monday morning, as the teams prepared to leave Singapore, the penalty had already taken on a life of its own. Analysts debated whether the FIA had applied the rules too rigidly. Fans divided into camps, those who defended consistency and those who demanded context. Ferrari issued a brief statement, accepting the penalty but calling for a broader discussion about exceptional circumstances. In plain terms, they were saying what everyone already felt: the rule might have been right, but the outcome was wrong. Singapore had drawn a new line, not on the circuit, but within the sport itself. For Hamilton, this was the real turning point, the moment when faith in the system began to fade. He had come to Ferrari seeking a legacy, a new chapter defined by unity and rebirth. But now, he was seeing what generations of drivers had discovered before him. At Ferrari, brilliance often battles bureaucracy. And at the FIA, justice sometimes travels slower than the cars it governs. Singapore did not just cost him a place in the standings. It cost him a measure of trust. And for a champion like Hamilton, that loss of belief can be far more dangerous than any mechanical failure. From the outside, it looked like just another post-race penalty. A few seconds added to a result, a name moved down one position in the final classification. But what really happened in Singapore was far more complex and far more revealing. It was the latest example of a recurring pattern that has haunted both Hamilton and Ferrari throughout their 2025 campaign. The team delivers flashes of brilliance, and then, just as the promise becomes real, it all unravels in confusion and contradiction. Singapore didn't expose Hamilton's weakness. It exposed Formula One's. Everything began long before the penalty. On Friday, Hamilton had shown his most confident form yet in the Ferrari SF25. His words over the radio were full of connection and control. "The car is starting to talk to me." That line became the soundbite of the weekend, proof that after months of struggling with setup and balance, something had finally clicked. Ferrari engineers believed they had found the perfect equilibrium between downforce and tire management. But that sense of progress would last only until Saturday, when a familiar strategic hesitation appeared. Once again, Hamilton was sent out last in qualifying. Once again, he lost tire temperature waiting in the queue. Once again, Ferrari's small errors turned into large consequences. That same indecision would come back to haunt them on Sunday. By lap 3, Hamilton's data began showing dangerous brake temperatures on the left front corner. The engineers noticed the spike. They hesitated. They convinced themselves it could be managed. In theory, the numbers were survivable, but in the heat and humidity of Marina Bay, theory doesn't always translate to reality. Hamilton could feel the degradation long before it appeared on the telemetry. He radioed concerns early, but there was no margin for a pit stop. Ferrari chose to gamble on his skill, trusting that he could nurse the car to the finish. And for more than 60 laps, that is exactly what he did. But even the greatest drivers cannot defy physics forever. As the brake temperatures climbed, Hamilton's braking zones extended, forcing him to alter his racing line to keep the car stable. That adjustment, the same maneuver that saved Ferrari from retirement, became the very act for which he would later be punished. Each time he took a wider exit to keep control, the sensors registered a track limit violation. Each time he prevented a lockup, he created data that would be used against him. It was a paradox, a rule book written for precision, applied to a race run on instinct. When the FIA reviewed the footage, they saw what the cameras showed, but not what the cockpit felt. They saw a car crossing white lines. They did not see a driver managing a mechanical failure at 300 kilometers per hour. Ferrari attempted to explain the context, but the stewards stood firm. The rule is clear. Every excursion beyond the limits must be penalized. It did not matter that Hamilton had no intention of gaining time, only of staying alive in the car. To them, consistency mattered more than circumstance. It was a decision rooted in regulation, not reason. And that is the heart of the problem, not just for Hamilton, but for Formula One itself. The sport exists at the crossroads between science and spirit. It demands that drivers obey laws of physics and bureaucracy at once. But sometimes those two worlds collide. In Singapore, they collided violently. Hamilton's drive was a display of human control at its highest level, and yet it was judged purely by data. The same sensors that allowed him to save the car condemned him in the report. The result was a penalty that technically fit the rulebook, but emotionally defied fairness. It left fans divided, Ferrari frustrated, and Hamilton standing once again in the middle of Formula One's oldest argument. Where does the rule end, and where does the race begin? The core of Singapore's scandal was not politics. It was engineering. What happened to Lewis Hamilton's Ferrari that night was the perfect storm of design philosophy meeting environmental reality. The SF25 was conceived to run close to the ground, generating massive aerodynamic load from underbody airflow. It is a car that thrives on smooth circuits like Silverstone or Monza. But on a city circuit like Marina Bay, where bumps disrupt airflow and corners arrive every few seconds, that same design becomes a liability. The brakes, already under immense stress, lose the cooling airflow they need to survive. What happened to Hamilton was not a random failure. It was the inevitable result of Ferrari's trade-off between qualifying speed and race endurance. The numbers told the story before the drama unfolded. In the second lap, the left front brake had already exceeded its ideal temperature range by more than 50 degrees. The car's sensors began to register oscillations in pressure and irregular friction. Hamilton, with years of experience reading the car's language, felt it instantly. He reported a soft pedal, meaning the brake pressure was fading. Ferrari's engineers responded with reassurance, asking him to manage it with lift and coast, the technique where a driver eases off the throttle earlier to reduce brake stress. What they did not admit on the radio was that the issue would only grow worse with every kilometer. The brake duct design was trapping heat inside, and no amount of driving skill could stop the slow destruction that followed. Hamilton's ability to adapt became the difference between finishing the race and ending in the wall. He changed his driving style mid-race, moving braking points further down the straights, avoiding sudden inputs, and using engine braking through the gearbox to slow the car. It was a delicate dance between control and chaos, one mistake away from disaster. Every lap was a calculation: how much pressure to apply, how much risk to take, how much heat the car could tolerate before something catastrophic happened. What fans saw as calm precision on television was, in truth, an extraordinary act of survival. And yet, that very mastery became his undoing. Because he kept the car on track, because he managed to control it without spinning or crashing, the FIA assumed the situation had been manageable. They saw a man racing normally, not a man racing on instinct to save a dying machine. The car's telemetry, stripped of emotion, showed a driver exceeding track limits multiple times. The data did not show the reason behind it: the shifting brake balance, the unpredictable deceleration, the need to steer around invisible dangers. To the stewards, it was numbers. To Hamilton, it was a battlefield. The irony is that Ferrari had seen this problem coming months before. The SF25's thermal management had been a weakness all season, particularly at street circuits. The narrower brake ducts introduced to warm the tires faster during qualifying had a hidden cost. Once the race began, those same ducts trapped too much heat. It was a fundamental flaw that the team never truly solved. They had gambled that Hamilton's experience could overcome it. And for 60 laps, he did. But no human, not even one of the greatest in history, can defy the mechanical truth of overheating carbon. When sparks finally burst from a front left, the system had already passed the point of no return. What makes the story more painful is that Ferrari knew they could not fix it. The team had already frozen development on the SF25 to focus on their 2026 car. That meant no new brake designs, no new cooling solutions, no more chances to patch the car's weaknesses. Hamilton, therefore, was racing a machine at its final limit, a car that could not evolve while its rivals were still improving. He was not only fighting against temperature and time, but against the philosophy of his own team. In Singapore, that fight reached its climax. The engineering limit of the Ferrari SF25 became the emotional limit of Lewis Hamilton.